Okay, so here are the toss-ups for the section 9 of authors and works. Study guide for Quiz Bowl, Gilgamesh through Voltaire. Toss-up number 1. In one of the author's books, Judge Bedoye is put on trial after he is exposed for making all his rulings by rolling dice. This author wrote of the sheep merchant at Dindano who has one of his sheep thrown into the sea aboard a ship, causing the rest of the sheep to blindly follow the first to their demise. The second book by this author ends with Friar John being financed to create an anti-church whose motto is, "Do what thou wilt," called the Abbey of Theleme. This author created a son of Lord Grangousier, who requires 17,913 cows to provide his daily milk, and killed thousands of Parisians who annoyed him by drowning them in floods of his urine. The third, fourth, and fifth books by this author include the libertine Panurge. For 10 points, name the 16th century French author of Gargantua and Pantagruel. And of course, that is Rabelais. Toss-up number 2. A character in this play repeatedly exclaims, "Poor man," as he is told that another character ate 2 partridges and had a good sleep. In this play, a bailiff announces that the house has to be evacuated and given to a man who carried off a box of forged letters. This play opens with Madame Purnell scolding the sharp-tongued servant Dorine. In this place, Elmire hides her husband under a table while the title character attempts to seduce her. At the end of this play, Orgon and his family are saved from the title character when the king orders his arrest. For 10 points, name this play whose title character is Religious Fraud, a work of Molière. And that is, of course, Tartuffe. Toss-up number 3. One work by this writer gives visions he had in a dream into the title Triumphs or Triomphi. This poet wrote a work asserting he was the first since ancient times to climb a mountain just for the view. This poet of the Ascent of Mount Ventoux and the epic work Africa wrote a collection of 366 poems about a woman who may be the wife of Count Huys de Sade, and that has a title translated as Songbook. This poet's collection, Il Canzoniere, contains many examples of the 14-line sonnet form named after him. For 10 points, name this Italian humanist who wrote many poems about his love, Laura. And that is, of course, Petrarch. Toss-up number 4. One character in this work is a flight blocked by a shapeless black being called a fatal dart, and a woman who sprang from his head with whom he committed incest. This poem's author is inspired by a heavenly muse, that dove-like satirist brooding in 4 invocations, and its opening includes a debate in which Belial and Mammon speak in pandemonium. A couple, hand in hand, take their solitary way at the end of this 12-book poem, in which Raphael and Michael speak in part to justify the ways of God to men. For 10 points, name this epic about the fall of Satan, Adam, and Eve by John Milton. And that is Paradise Lost. Toss-up number 5. In this poem, 700 camels and 1,000 hawks are included as a part of an embassy sent by the wise advisor Blancandrin. This poem's last line declares the end of a story by the mysterious poet Turoldus. In this poem, Thierry wins a trial by combat against Pinabel to prove that a man revealed a secret past to King Marcella's army. Archbishop Turpin and the wise knight Oliver die fighting alongside this poem's hero, who is betrayed by Ganelon. In this poem, the veins in the hero's temples burst when he blows his ivory horn to alert his army to the rearguard's defeat by Saracens at Rosenval. For 10 points, name this medieval poem about a hero in Charlemagne's army. And that is the Song of Roland, Chanson de Roland. Toss-up number 6. This character dreams about a mountain falling on him, and then he dreams about an earthquake followed by lightning that burns everything. Before that, this character tells his mother about separate dreams in which he falls in love with a meteor and an axe. In the Cedar Forest, this man is aided by the sun god Shamash in killing the giant Humbaba, and he receives advice from one of the few survivors of the Great Flood, Napshitim. This man slays the bull of heaven after rejecting Ishtar's marriage proposal, and he mistakenly kills his friend Enkidu. Named this king of Uruk, the title character of a Sumerian epic, and that is Gilgamesh. Toss-up number 7. This author read a story in which a syphilitic soldier overhears a conversation between Scipio and Berganza about how they can talk even though they are animals. After one of this man's character refuses to pay at an inn, another character is wrapped in a blanket and tossed up and down. A rash of spurious sequels to a work that this man initially attributed to Sid Hamet Benengeli caused him to write a continuation 10 years later. The Colloquy of the Dogs is one of this man's exemplary novels. The title character of another of his novels confuses a wash basin for the helmet of Mambrino, names his horse Rocinante and an unsuspecting girl Dulcinea, and tilts at windmills with his friend Sancho Panza. For 10 points, named this author of Don Quixote. and that is Cervantes, Miguel de Cervantes. Toss-up 8. A character in this collection is branded on his buttocks with a hot iron poker after he farts in the face of the clerk, Absalom. In that story from this collection, the student Nicholas seduces Alison, the wife of the carpenter John. This collection includes a story where Theseus imprisons Palamon and Arcite, who then fight over Emily. The stories in this collection are told by a group of pilgrims traveling to visit the shrine of Thomas Becket. For 10 points, name this collection by Geoffrey Chaucer that includes stories told by the knight and the wife of Bath. And that is Canterbury Tales. Toss-up 9. This man's essay on epic poetry contains the story about an apple falling on Newton's head, and as elements of Newton's philosophy reveals the same admiration he expresses in his 24 letters concerning the English nation. In one of his plays, Polyphonte is a tyrant who wishes to marry the titled widow Cresphontes. In addition to Merope, this character created Cador, who helps Queen Astarte of Babylon escape with her lover, the prime minister. A hermit reveals himself as Jesrod to the titled Babylonian king in his novel Zadig, or The Book of Fate, but he is better known for a satire on Leibniz, including characters like Giroflee, Paquette, and Dr. Pangloss. For 10 points, name or identify this Enlightenment essayist and philosopher best known for writing Candide, and that is Voltaire. Toss-up 10. The main characters in this novel are the author, his friend in real life, and a fictional philosopher. It is set in Antwerp, though much of it consists of the philosopher describing his travels around the world. The philosopher has been to a place that used to be called Abraxa that was connected to a mainland until its inhabitant destroyed an isthmus. All of its residents do farm work in addition to an other job, and there is no private property. Name this novel, whose title literally means nowhere, completed in 1516 by Thomas More, and that is Utopia. Toss-up 11. Gerard and Margaret are revealed to be this author's parents at the end of Charles Reade's The Cloister and the Hearth. The main character of a work by this author is a child of Plutus who claims that there are 2 types of madness, one in which is divinely inspired and introduces attendants such as Colakia, Misoponia, and Hedone. The title character tries to use the key to his money chest to open the gates of heaven in a dialogue between St. Peter and a violent pope by this author, Julius Exclusus. This author of Handbook of Christian Knight wrote a letter to his friend Thomas More that is usually appended to his satire, in which the title character orates on the corruption of the Catholic Church. For 10 points, name this Dutch humanist author who wrote In Praise of Folly, and that is Erasmus. Toss-up 12. A play about this figure names his father Dieg, and sees him in love with Chimène. That play is by Pierre Corneille and inspired a Massenet opera. In one section of the epic poem that is the source for this figure, the princes of Carrion tie their wives to trees, and earlier he fights the Moorish king of Zaragoza and conquers Valencia. He is initially exiled by Alfonso VI, but by the end his daughter marries the princes of Aragon and Navarre, beginning his nation's unification. For 10 points, name this Spanish epic hero. That is the Cid. C-I-D, Cid. Toss-up 13. This author wrote a sonnet to his friend Guido Cavalcanti that is a part of a 42-section collection of prose and poetry. This exile from his native city wrote of Paolo and Francesca in a terza rima poetic cycle starting halfway along our life's path, in which he meets a lion, a leopard, and a wolf in a forest before he crosses the Acheron. Later in that work, this author of La Vita Nuova ascends through 9 spheres and enters the Empyrean. He wrote a work in which he ventures through hell and purgatory and is guided through heaven by Beatrice. For 10 points, name this author whose Inferno and Paradiso forms part of his Divine Comedy. That is Dante Alighieri. Toss-up 14. A paradox resulting from studying this philosopher titles a novel by existential thinker Irvin Yalom. In one work, this philosopher suggested that knowledge arising from hearsay is one of the 4 possible modes of perception. In his major work, this author of Treatise on the Emendation of the Intellect argued that human mind strives towards preserving an essential quality, which he termed the conatus principle. This philosopher used the Latin phrase deus sive natura to argue that God is interchangeable with nature. This philosopher wrote posthumously published works that argued for a form of monist pantheism, which is structured similarly to a geometric set of axioms. For 10 points, name this modern Dutch philosopher who wrote the Ethics, and that is Spinoza. Baruch Spinoza. Toss-up number 15. In a letter, an author explained his version of this poem by stating, "Better live a sparrow than a stuffed eagle." Dante Gabriel Rossetti gave Robert Browning a copy of this poem, prompting him to extol heaven's consummate cup and claimed, "The best is yet to be," in Rabbi Ben Ezra. This poem describes the wine of life, oozing drop by drop, and the leaves of life dropping one by one. A line of this poem asks, "Who is the potter, pray, and who the pot?" Eugene O'Neill's play, Ah, Wilderness, takes its title from this poem, as does Agatha Christie's novel, The Moving Finger. In Edward Fitzgerald's translation, this poem describes a book of verses underneath the bough, along with a jug of wine, a loaf of bread, and thou. For 10 points, name this collection of quatrains by Omar Khayyam. And that is the Rubaiyat. Toss-up number 16. Some onlookers leave at the 9th hour because they believe this man was killed by the wolf of the waves. That creature's blood melts this man's weapon, who is covered with inscriptions of the great flood. This man's followers take 10 days to build a barrow that sailors can see along the coastline. This son of Edthro rules for 50 winters until a man steals a golden cup. This man sleeps without armor or weapons to confront a creature he defeats by ripping off its arm. This wielder of the sword, Hrunting, defeats the descendant of the biblical Cain, as well as that monster's mother. This man is mortally wounded after Wiglaf helps him defeat a dragon. This man saves Hero, the hall of the king Hrothgar, from the monster Grendel. For 10 points, name this hero of an old English epic poem. And that is, of course, Beowulf. Toss-up 17. One section of this book critiques how the vain and erroneous philosophy of the Greeks have helped the forces of darkness enter in the night of our natural ignorance. This book adds the phrase, "Seeing therefore miracles now cease," to the question of which scriptures are to be trusted to avoid refuting the Bible. One of its sections describes how a kingdom of darkness is nothing else but a confederacy of deceivers. This book, which praises monarchy among 3 types of commonwealth, describes how, without civil society, men suffer a war of all against all. For 10 points, name this book that describes life as solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short by Thomas Hobbes. And that is Leviathan. Toss-up 18. One of this author's play begins with the title character hailing the world soul while standing in front of his gold. Another of his plays is titled for an event featuring an unlicensed Puritan sermon and a puppet show by a playwright whose name refers to his lack of talent. In a play by this author, Captain Face convinces Doll Common and Subtle to help him run a con during a plague. He wrote a play in which Peregrine befriends Sir Politic would-be, and 3 men are each convinced by Musca that they are the heir to the titleman's wealth. For 10 points, name the 17th century English author of Bartholomew Fair, The Alchemist, and Volpone. And that is Ben Jonson. Toss-up 19. This author's work, Il Filocolo, includes 13 questions of love that are discussed in the presence of Fiammetta. This author's work, Il Filostrato, was the main source of Chaucer's Troilus and Cressida. This author's most famous work includes several stories in which Calandrino is pranked, and one in which the Marquess of Saluzzo tests the fidelity of Griselda, who is very patient. That work by this author is set during the Black Plague and also includes 100 stories. For 10 points, name this 14th century Italian author of the Decameron. And that is Boccaccio. Toss-up 20. A text this philosopher organizes various instances agreeing in the form of heat into a table of presentation. Denis Diderot's taxonomy of knowledge was inspired by this philosopher's division of the human mind into memory, imagination, and reason. An allegorical book by this philosopher is set at an ideal school on the island of Bensalem. This philosopher theorized 4 fallacies called the idols of the cave, the tribe, the theater, and the marketplace in a text proposing his namesake method. For 10 points, name this British philosopher of the New Atlantis and Novum Organum, who emphasized an empiricist and inductive scientific method. And that is Bacon. Francis Bacon. Toss-up 21. In one poem, the figure of death asserts his highest excellence or power by rendering a golden hair from the head of this person. The last poem in the collection, Triumphs, depicts the author's reunification with this person, who is said to have turned an author's soul away from all that is base in a confession known as Secretum Meum. This person is addressed as you who hear the sound in scattered rhymes in a collection of poems known as the Songbook. The author of that collection first saw this woman in a church in his hometown of Avignon, then depicted her in the collection Il Canzoniere. In a type of sonnet, he uses that uses an octet and sestet, the author depicted his love for this woman. For 10 points, name this muse of the Renaissance poet Petrarch. And that is Laura. Toss-up 22. A letter to this thinker objects to his invocation of the scholastic notion of a rock's weight, since his own mechanistic physics denied that weight was a real quantity. That letter inquires about the interaction problem. Another woman argued that souls do not have a sex after she read this thinker's work on animal spirits. This man died shortly after arriving at the court of Queen Christina. Mary Astell argued for women's education on account of this man's idea that extended substances were separate from mental substances. Elizabeth of Bohemia critiqued this thinker's namesake mind-body dualism. For 10 points, name this author of Meditations on First Philosophy, whose discourse on method claims ergo cogito sum, I think, therefore I am. Or cogito ergo sum, I'm sorry. And that, of course, is Descartes. Toss-up number 23. An author writing about these two relatives refers to an anonymous, great and inestimable chronicle detailing their origins and described their philosophy as a certain gaiety of spirit pickled in the scorn of fortune. After Friar John helps one of these two people win a battle, that person rewards him by building an abbey governed by the rule, do what thou wilt. The Abbey of Thelem is founded by the father of this father and son pair, both of whom inexplicably vary in size over the course of 5 novels in which they appear. One of them travels to consult the oracle of the Holy Bottle with his friend Panurge. For 10 points, name these two giants who are the subject of a work by Francois Rabelais. And that is Gargantua and Pantagruel. Toss-up 24. I think there are 36 total. The title character of one of this author's early works keeps the slave Isidore as his mistress and owns the male slave named Holly. A square near Arnulf's house is the setting for another of his works, in which Horace repeatedly promises that he will marry Agnes. After writing The Sicilian, he created a character who is sued for telling a poet to give up after reading a sonnet and is sent into isolation. This author wrote about a man served by Toinette who opens a play by refusing to pay his apothecary fairly. This author wrote The School for the Wives and created the Doctor in spite of himself. The title character of a work by this author is a religious hypocrite who tries to seduce Orgon's wife Elmire. For 10 points, name this author of The Imaginary Invalid and Tartuffe. And that is Moliere. Toss-up 25. This poet memorialized a friend who was nursed upon the self-same hill and fed the same flock, and who died when the remorseless deep closed over his head. He wrote a pair of contrasting poems that begins, hence vain deluding joys, and hence loathed melancholy. This poet described a spirit that, dove-like, sat brooding on the vast abyss and made it pregnant. His medium-length poems include L'Allegro, Le Penseroso, and Lycidas. A long poem by this man promises to tell of man's first disobedience and includes speeches by a hopelessly charismatic Satan. For 10 points, name the 17th century English poet of Paradise Lost. And that is John Milton. Toss-up 26. In the second part of this novel, the author uses the story of a madman who shoves a pipe reed up a dog's hindquarters and inflates the dog into a ball to criticize an author who wrote a false work depicting this novel's title character. The 2 parts of this novel were published 10 years apart. The second part opens by depicting the third sally of the title character, after which he is tricked by a duke and a duchess. A fictional Moorish historian named Sidi Hamet Benegeli is said to be the author of this novel, which ends with the protagonist promising to disinherit his niece if she ever reads works of chivalry. After being beaten by the Knight of the White Moon, the title character becomes ill and dies at the end of, for 10 points, what novel by Miguel de Cervantes? And that is, of course, Don Quixote. Toss-up 27. In one of this author's works, a knight who serves love tells the poet how he lost his queen in a game of chess against Fortuna. In addition to that poem, which begins by retelling Ovid's story about Ceyx and Alcyone, this author wrote a poem in which Scipio Africanus guides the narrator to Venus's temple. This author of the Book of the Duchess and the Parliament of Fowls wrote a more famous work which features the story of Arcite and Palamon as told by a knight, set against a framed narrative of a pilgrimage to the grave of Thomas Becket. For 10 points, name this author who included tales from people like the Nun's Priest and the Wife of Bath in his collection, The Canterbury Tales. And that is Geoffrey Chaucer. Toss-up 26. This book's main character asks an old man if his country prays to God, to which the old man replies, "No, we have nothing to ask him." The protagonist of this book rides in a coach pulled by 6 flying sheep to meet a country's king, and at one point is almost eaten by a tribe of cannibals and mistakes him for a Jesuit. After the protagonist of this novella loses the riches he acquired in El Dorado, he proclaims that we must cultivate our gardens. When this novella's protagonist learns that Baron Thunder Ten Trunk's daughter has become ugly, he finally rejects the Leibnizian optimism of Dr. Pangloss. A woman named Cunegonde is the beloved by the title character of, for 10 points, what novella by Voltaire? And that is Candide. Toss-up 29. This man ordered Richard Bayfield's burning at the stake and also persecuted John Frith. This man led a campaign against collaborators of William Tyndale while in his highest post, in which he was replaced by Thomas Audley after his failure to attend a certain wedding and his refusal to sign the Act of Supremacy. This man translated the first Pico della Mirandola biography into English and established a friendship with Erasmus during Erasmus' visit to his country. For 10 points, named this patron saint of politics and Lord Chancellor to Henry VIII, who got his head chopped off in 1535 and wrote Utopia, and that is Sir Thomas More. Toss-up number 30. This work concludes with the speaker telling the readers that they are grossly mistaken if they think she can recollect any of the hodgepodge melody of speech she has just spoken. This essay praises bees and their inimitable combs for their industry despite being nature's dumb creatures. Much of this essay attacks long-robed philosophers, artisans, and priests and describes how the title character is served by laziness, forgetfulness, and self-love. This encomium is often published with the illustrations of Hans Holbein and is named for a goddess who is the daughter of Youth and Plutus, laughing at the stupidity of the world. Thomas More is the dedicatee of, for 10 points, what essay by Desiderius Erasmus that venerates foolishness, and that is in praise of folly. Toss-up number 31. In one part of this poem, the protagonist has to climb aboard a creature with the wings of a dragon, the tail of a scorpion, and the face of an honest man in order to scale a cliff. In the first section of this poem, which is set on the night of Maundy Thursday, a panther, a she-wolf, and a lion appear to frighten a character who is midway upon the journey of his life. The protagonist of this poem encounters people tossed about by strong winds, including the murdered lovers, Paolo and Francesca. Its protagonist is guided through 9 circles by Virgil. For 10 points, name this poem, which is succeeded by the Purgatorio and Paradiso, the first part of Dante's Divine Comedy. That is Inferno. Best thing I read in high school. Toss-up 32. This man wrote a work discussing the sun who scattered into flight the stars before him. This author of poems like Come Fill the Cup and The Shears of Fate helped create the Jalali calendar. The Somerton man was found dead with this man's most famous work's final words, Tamam Shud. This man discusses a book of verses underneath the bough, a jug of wine, a loaf of bread, and thou, in the 13th of a series of poems translated by Edward Fitzgerald. For 10 points, name this Persian polymath who wrote, The moving finger writes, and having writ, moves on, in his Rubaiyat, and that is Omar Khayyam. Toss-up 33. This thinker wrote that curiosity about the causes of events and anxiety about the future cause people to adopt religious beliefs. He called hope appetite with an opinion of attaining. Bishop John Brummel published a work castigating this man's animadversions and called his most famous work a Rebel's Catechism. This thinker theorized that the implication within the right of nature of a right to all things leads to war of all against all in a work that contains the sections of man and of the kingdom of darkness, and describes life in the state of nature as solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. For 10 points, name this author of Leviathan. And, why is he skipping me? Oh, I can't get Thomas More out of my mind. Who is the author of Leviathan? I'm going to have to come back to it. I cannot believe that I cannot come up with the author of Leviathan. Is it Thomas Hobbes? I think it's Hobbes. I'm almost positive it's Hobbes. We're going to say Hobbes. Oh, my heavens. I cannot believe it. All right. Toss-up number 34. Brain lapse in the highest degree. One character in this play claims that the soul of Pythagoras is the body of a hermaphrodite. That character was depicted in this play as a dwarf named Nano. Another character of this play is a man who is mistaken for a tortoise as a part of Peregrine's prank. In one scene of this play, Bonario witnesses the title character's attempted rape of Celia from behind a curtain. Another scene in this play features the embarrassment of Sir Politic would-be Corbaccio, Corvino, and Voltaire all wish to inherit the title estate of the titular character and his servant Mosca. For 10 points, name this play about a foxy con man written by Ben Jonson. And that is Volpone. Toss-up number 35, which is last. In one section of this book, friends of a con artist named Onion steal a parrot feather from his knapsack and replace it with charcoal as a prank. In another section of this book, a woman tries to cure her sick son by asking for a nobleman's falcon, but the nobleman cooks the falcon for her as a meal. A section of this book in which Melchizedek analogizes Christianity, Islam, and Judaism to a rich man's three rings inspired Gotthold Lessing's Nathan the Wise. Chaucer's Clerk's Tale draws from the final story in this book, which is told by Dioneo about the loyalty tests endured by the patient Griselda. For 10 points, name this collection of stories told by 10 young Florentines fleeing the plague, written by Giovanni Boccaccio, and that is the Decameron. So that's it for this section. Hopefully you've done well and that you keep studying, learn that literature, and earn yourself points and victories. Thanks so much.